What I want to emphasize is the difference between the system and the people in the roles created by the system, and highlight the fact that while changing people in roles is relatively easy to do, it's resisted based on a rank pyramid where the people at the top resist the change of role the most, because it takes a lot of discipline. If you're the president and you're being asked to follow the rules and follow the roles, but you've got no enforcement mechanism above you because you're at the top, or if you're hand in glove with top leadership, then the changing of the role becomes much more difficult. Usually in a power structure, it's kind of built up by a loyalty to the leader that demands that those in supporting roles would sacrifice themselves, the traditional resignation of a junior official to protect the reputation of the top official is, ubiquitous in human power structures. So the systemic change is usually held in place through a combination of cult norms and the attachment to the role, which carries a certain amount of rank and power in power structures. So there's a general uneasiness in traumatized cults to major systemic changes, because that takes everyone in the cult, everyone in the circle, into the unknown, which requires each individual to face the unknown, which requires each individual to face their fears of the unknown, which in a traumatized circle is the greatest fear. In horror movies, they don't usually show and name the peak moments of horror. It's left to the imagination. And the imagination doesn't exactly crystallize what is that worst possible fear. It's just out of language, just out of view. It's hinted at, because in a traumatized cult, the fear of the unknown trumps all other fears. And all change, all chaos, all shifts of a framework, a paradigm, a normal way of seeing and doing things, brings up that fear of the unknown. So to change a system, to ask everyone to confront that resistance, that fear of the unknown, is asking the circle to do what it fears the most. And in a traumatized cult, most people's highest loyalty is to avoiding their pain, which means bowing to their fear of change and the unknown. Fear is built on top of pain. If there is no pain or resistance to pain, there's no fear. Fear is of experiencing pain. So the fear of the unknown is the fear of the worst possible pain, which for people with unresolved trauma, almost all of us, takes us into those timeless, structureless places in the psyche where there is the reality or the threat of separation, of loss of identity. And it's worth noting that this is what trauma is. It is an attack, a mass of energy that threatens the identity, the pattern of thinking, feeling, speaking, and doing. That is the known self and the known world created out of that self. Now, the common practice to protect a system is to defend the system at all cost, but first scapegoat individuals. So if you can blame the flaws of the system that are inherent in the system on an individual, then that individual can be scapegoated and cast out of the circle. And the lie that is at the basis of this action is that if one individual or two or three bad apples are cast out, that the flawed system that worked with those individuals, that in many cases nurtured and created those individuals, is fine. And so the system and the threat of systemic change is suppressed by targeting the attack on a few individuals. What happens, whether it's the war on drugs or the war on crime or the war on terror or the war on sanity, whatever the war on truth, what happens is that in most cases, something else just fills in the gap created by the system. So for a system to change in a systemic way, it actually requires the participation of a good chunk of the people in all portions of the circle. And it requires an awareness of the flaw in the system. People, the raw software of the human body, are neither innately good or bad, destructive or constructive. People run software. They run a system. And that system has a set of value hierarchies. In a chauvinistic capitalist system like our own, a lot of it has to do with the idea that externals, that money, for example, is more important than the human beings who make it. And you'll see decisions being made throughout the cult that prioritize the money, the net profit, at the expense of sometimes the well-being of just about everyone in the system. But if well-being, human beings, can be sacrificed for higher yields, the idea in a chauvinistic system that values money more than the people who make it, that value the golden egg more than the golden goose, this makes sense. And so we're looking at a system. We're looking at a system in which the education, middle school through college, is committed to the chauvinism of elevating external masculine sciences at the expense of inner or more feminine sciences, the science of psychology, the science of feelings, the science of emotions. As a result, you have a high level of willful ignorance in these areas. Now, willful ignorance always leads to systemic pain. Because when you're ignorant, it doesn't change the landscape of the inner world of feelings. When you're ignorant, you violate what you cannot see, understand, and empathize with. And that is the inner and more feminine domains of both men and women. You can have men that are more feminine than women. You can have women that are more masculine than men. The focus that's most relevant is the balance in a given cult between the awareness, the consciousness that's brought to feminine terrain within men and women and masculine terrain within men and women. And the cult obsession with physical sex and the relative degradation of mental emotional sex is a great example of that. Now, within the physical feeling dynamic, the cult values physicality above feelings. Within the mental emotional dynamic, so the outer physical and the mind are both dealing with structure, with particles, with shapes, with externals in the more masculine sector. So again, you'll be able to analyze in dinner tables all across our cult the emphasis on the thoughts that are said and the de-emphasis on the feelings. So this value hierarchy shifts the emphasis, because all feelings do produce thoughts. You can focus on the thoughts and you can focus on the outer world to the exclusion of the feelings involved. And that's what is done. It's one of the bases for conflict, because almost everyone has slightly different ideas. And if you represent your feelings through an idea, those ideas are given more rank than the feelings. It's often viewed through the lens of chauvinism as an embarrassment to simply say, I feel small, I feel hurt, I feel lonely, and I'd like to feel better. And what would make me feel better is to be hugged and paid some attention to and listened to. This is a very low-ranking status. It's actually viewed as childlike. And children in a more feminine state than a mature body chronologically are also viewed as lower rank, as something to be patronized, whether it's the inner child or the outer child. And so you have a strong competition within the cult in the growing up process to escape the emotionality of the childlike and emotional states of feminine terrain, and talk instead about ideas and then compete at an ideation level to have more impactful ideas, which in a chauvinistic paradigm tend to be the ideas that lead to dominance. It's a paradigm of warfare, which is referencing the reptilian fight, flight, freeze program of a traumatized cult. So the education process of both media, of both the actual, quote, education program, and the lessons learned in the playground are all lessons of chauvinism. They're all lessons that either elevate whoever happens to have the strongest body whoever happens to be able to endure pain the most without showing it, and whoever is most effective at cutting everyone else down, mentally, emotionally, physically, and financially. And that is how the rank system is established in a sociopathic value ranking, because sociopathic is about securing rank through the ability to frighten and attack other people. So this is really the system out of which the various roles involved play out and emerge. It's kind of a foundation. And it's an important foundation because as long as you have high levels of trauma that are not resolved in the cult, you will have high numbers of traumatized people. And as long as you have high numbers of traumatized people in a cult that doesn't respond to trauma, the attack on the empathic brain through the barrage of messages that empathy is unwelcome and viewed as weak because of its association with femininity. If the feminine principle is to connect and the masculine principle is to separate, we in our cult admire the independent, lone individual who doesn't need anyone, which is why adolescents, in the grips of trauma, pain, humiliation, and helplessness, grasp for that position. I don't need anyone. I don't need your help, is the position of a traumatized individual trying to gain rank within a sociopathic paradigm. And the fact that almost all of our teenagers grasp at that hook of I don't need you and hide the need in public. If there is need, deny it, lie about it. Speaks not so much to the innate nature of the individual, but to the rank ascension protocol in a sociopathic cult in which all that is feminine in men and women has lower rank. And there is a basis scientifically for deranking the feminine in a sociopathic environment. And it's crude, it's survival. If you try and empathize with a crocodile, you die faster than if you kill it the first time you get a chance and use its meat to sustain your body. So in a reptilian framework, the analytical brain combined with a sociopathic edict of fight, flight, and freeze does survive more reliably than feelings do, than taking it personally, than being empathic, than responding or empathizing. Because reptiles do not respond to empathy, they exploit it. Because reptiles and the reptilian brain inside each one of us is incapable of empathy. It's only capable of analyzing threat and determining the fight, flight, freeze protocol that's best applied, which, just because you don't use physical violence, can be just as cutting and merciless in social status, in economics, and in emotional and mental brutality. So this system is, the system that directly and indirectly leads to vast amounts of unnecessary suffering, the dehumanizing of a population by engaging the ancient brain, the reptilian brain, that cannot empathize. And so it's you can be an incredibly sophisticated and competent reptile in our cult and still be denied the opportunity to feel what it's like to be a human being. The safety, the attunement, the empathy, the trust, the trustworthiness. It's not present in a reptilian environment. It's not present in people surviving through their reptilian brain in a reptilian environment. It's also out of this chauvinism that the cult as a whole, both in tax dollars and in personal dollars, spends far less on psychological literacy, emotional literacy, relational literacy than it does on cars, status symbols, larger houses. You can have a completely emotionally incompetent human being trapped in a reptilian brain who will gladly spend $4,000 retrofitting their kitchen with granite countertops, but would show extreme skepticism and contempt for the idea of taking a 6-week class for $500 on how to become more emotionally competent. They might take a power negotiation, intimidation class to ascend and work, but a class to help them listen and really understand the felt experience of every member of their family or their workplace or their lover. That isn't an obvious choice for a reptile. It's not at all rational for the reptilian brain, particularly as the reptilian brain synergizes with the analytic pattern analyzing brain to recognize what will get you rank, and through rank, greater odds of survival and security within the cult framework. So the community that is educated in chauvinism will not fund the science and the competency to treat their inner world, their psyche, their feminine side, as competently, as scientifically, as effectively as they will fund their computers, their cars, their nuclear missiles, their cyber security system. There's a different standard of competency demanded for a cell phone than there is for a therapist. And one of the problems that David Dunning outlined in his university study, I think it was Duke University, is that when you lack competency in something, in this case emotional and psychological literacy, you also lack the necessary competency to evaluate how incompetent or competent you are and how incompetent or competent other people are. And when you're already in a framework of scarcity, because you will always have scarcity when capital is valued more than the people who make it. Because it doesn't matter how much can be produced in a factory, etc. When you value money more than the people who make the money, there will always be scarcity, because there will always be some people whose talents and uniqueness are not rewarded well in a capitalist framework because they don't make a lot of money. So therapy does not usually make more money. Howard Stern's $500 million serious show and salary did not go up because he's been undergoing extensive psychotherapy for more than 5 years. It may even have gone down because in a chauvinistic cult, if you talk about the inner world at all, you lose rank. And one would have to say that in part, the Howard Stern show is one of the most popular shows in the cult because of its high levels of sociopathic behavior. There is an emphasis on humor, on gossip, on sexuality and nudity without feeling, on revenge, on power dynamics, and there's a fair amount of kind of contempt and objectification that goes on that feels very comfortable to the reptilian mind, but very uncomfortable for domains in the feminine psyche. And the show is attended, having gained its rank for high levels of sociopathic behavior. It is attended primarily as a power move for the guests. It's not comfortable to be put on the spot with millions of listeners and viewers by Howard Stern, but it may sell your book or give you a boost in reputation or give you access to something else. And so you go through the discomfort and the anxiety in order to do that, to gain rank. Now, if a community and a cult will not fund the feminine side of its own institutions, of its own personal education, there will be a lower competency. And with a lower competency comes an inability to discern between high and low competency. And that's fine, because in a chauvinistic paradigm, that world doesn't matter all that much anyways. It's something to be a little embarrassed about. But it's that doesn't change. You don't get the type of top psychological empathy, wizardry and empathy, profound traumatic healing at a systemic level. You don't find that in an underfunded, low-rank arena of the cult. And so this really puts all of the emphasis on the circle, meaning as long as you and I are willing to pay our taxes and have big chunks go to the military and big chunks go to support bills supported primarily by lobbyists, feelings don't generally make a lot of money. Manipulating them does to sell products. So advertisers in a sociopathic paradigm are often the most informed about impact. But the reason they become informed is not to love their husbands and wives better. The reason they become informed is so that they can exploit that technology to sell more products that are not justified based on their merit. They're justified based on the manipulative talent of the advertiser. So it is psychology exploited to sell products in the understanding that money is more important than human beings. So the fact that there may be some safety elements, of course, would be cut out of the advertising because it doesn't sell anything to point that out. And a common board discussion in an auto manufacturer where a defect is discovered in a drug or a car is the accountant will sit down and figure out how many lives will be lost and what the average court settlement is to pay off people who successfully prove a case. So they'll try and deny and lie about the safety defects in the vehicles. And they'll say, well, based on our current intimidation tactics, there will only be about 7 people a year who will go through the bother of getting around all of our various discouragement protocols and all the laws that we've helped to pass to make sure that people cannot sue us for defective work. But 7 every year are going to get through. Now, we'll spend $200 million intimidating, discouraging, and lobbying for bills to make sure we can't be sued. And then we're going to have to pay a settlement of $2 million average for 7 people, or $14 million. And so we've got a total of, let's say $214 million in that. But if we do a recall or we upgrade all of our equipment so that 200 people don't experience paralysis, etc., due to our defect, it will cost $300 million. Therefore, we recommend do not do the recall. The shareholders who have the most money and who need the least money, that's why they're investors, that means they've got spare money, they will make an extra 30% if this recall does not occur. And so the recall is denied, and year after year, 7 victims of preventable injury who are kept in the dark, because if it was public, then there would be more than 7 claimants. And if the truth came out, then they'd actually it'd be cheaper to do the recall. But the CEO that's trying to get their shareholder bonuses for getting the stock up that quarter is interested in their stock getting up that quarter. They're not interested in saving 200 lives through a known defect. And so the deal is that you don't get hired as an attorney and as an advisor and as an accountant unless you go through the vetting process of proving that if you're paid well, you will always advise in a way that saves the company the most short-term amount of money and passes that on to the shareholders, not the employees. And those people will climb in rank, because that's how a reptile thinks. And in a reptilian framework, you are rewarded for being an intelligent reptile, which is defined by passing on as much money to the shareholder. So this is accepted protocol, and it's a self-referential protocol, meaning anyone who is, quote, derogatively referred to as a bleeding heart, one of those people that actually cares about human beings more than money, well, you're not welcome in leadership. It's fine if you want to slave away at two jobs to barely make ends meet, but you are the enemy of the sociopathic power structure that will be rewarded by shareholders, that the CEO did not act in the interest of the employees or the public, but in the interest of the shareholders, whose money is more valuable than the employees, the nation, and the shareholders. This sociopathic ethic is the system. It's a system of elevating the rational, analytic brain above the empathic brain, money above human beings, and nobilizing that this is enlightened self-interest and that everyone will benefit if everyone will simply be as selfish as possible. And while that may be true compared to centralized communism, it's not actually true based on the data of how much felt human well-being, which is the ultimate measure of intelligence. Meaning if you believe that to live a miserable life with lots of rank, power, fame, money, and sex is the goal, you've drunk the Kool-Aid of your cult. The goal of every human being is to feel sustainably better. And the promise of a reptilian or any framework is that you will feel better if you do what it takes to get more money, if you do what it takes to have more rank, if you do what it takes to have more fame, more sex appeal, or more sex, more power in one form or another, that you will actually feel better. But the data does not support that. The data suggests that the bully, that the sociopath, to the degree that they are still linked in any way to their empathic centers of the brain, suffers as much as the victim. And if there is no link to the empathic brain, meaning there has been a complete cauterization between the empathic brain and the reptilian brain, and so you are basically 100% reptile with a high functioning rational pattern organizing brain built over a fight, flight, freeze, fear-based system, then yes, within the reptilian paradigm, if you're a fear-based person that is low-ranking versus a fear-based person who is high-ranking, the high-ranking reptile will feel better than the low-ranking reptile. But it misses the point, which is that there is innate suffering in cauterizing the empathic and transcendent area of the brains in order to execute a competent reptilian protocol and maintain the status quo in the power structure. There is a tremendous loss of humanity, of soul, the feminine principle. There is the loss of the capacity to be loved and to love and to trust in empathy or be trustworthy in honor of empathy. That loss is not felt by a reptile because they are incapable of grasping what it is they gave up to climb rank within a largely sociopathic paradigm. Now, originally, they all gave up pain. That's where the cauterization takes place. That's where the dissociation takes place. If you look at the protocol for raising an emperor or raising a king, in most cases, there's a hardening process that brings the leader to a point where they can execute a woman, a child, or this or that to maintain the system. And the process of hardening them is to expose them to extreme reptilian protocols and environment, whether that's wrestling or swordsmanship or political craftsmanship, etc., to climb on the backs of others. There is a belief at the core of that, which is that love is not real, that empathy is not real. And if it is, it's incapable of competing in a reptilian framework. That is our system. And we give up large portions of our humanity, large portions of our empathy, the capacity to trust, and the capacity to be trustworthy to the feminine psyche. Now, in a chauvinistic paradigm where the masculine expression in men and women is elevated, the sense of chivalry, the sense of honor is lost, because in the symmetrical romance of the yin and the yang, the greatest expression of the yang is to serve and protect the yin. And the greatest expression of the yin is to honor, celebrate, delight in, and open to the yang. We're not talking male and female here. We're talking about the type of dance between these two polarities that exist in all interactions and all cults. And is it one of meaning, or is it one of grief and betrayal? Well, the typical chauvinist climbing the cult ladder is asked to give up their unpopular friendships, not just on the outside, but give up the parts of them that have empathy and care for a lower rank person as a human being, as an equal human being. And before you can be recognized in a circle of alligators, you have to dissociate. It's the same in gang protocol. You have to dissociate, which is why the gang initiation protocol, whether it's a financial gang, a political gang, or a street gang, and particularly in a street gang, you're often asked to betray your family. And it's a very good initiation into a reptilian gang, because the pain of letting your sister be raped, or stealing the family heirlooms, or murdering one of your family members or your best friend, the pain of that is so great that without medicine and without the capacity to grieve, we dissociate from the empathic brain and simultaneously give evidence and thus power to the gang leader to persecute us and have us serve time if the evidence of the crime that we commit as part of the initiation is made public, is handed to the police. But it's also saying, in order to join our gang, you've got to commit a violation towards your own feminine psyche that is so painful that if you don't dissociate from that part of yourself, you will not be able to function. Now, once you dissociate from that part of yourself, you will be a reptile with a strongly analytical mind. And you will be in a reptilian power structure where you must be sacrificed because you're not the top alpha in order to maintain the alpha's position. It basically means that in order to be, before you join a group, you have to become sociopathic. The need for survival, security, love, and belonging is such that we all seek a strong, secure relationship with something, and that's the offer of the gang. You know, the most vulnerable demographic around the world to strong reptilian cults are orphans, wronged people, people with a criminal record, people with addictions, people who are in large amounts of pain and isolation already are seeking to meet their first three human needs: to survive, to feel secure, to have love and belonging. So this has to be understood for anything with the Human Awareness Institute not to simply be a game of musical chairs, where the public will continue to seek high out as a low-paid entrance point to sex, sensuality, and adrenaline, because sex goes up, adrenaline goes up, stimulation goes up in the course of hanging out with a bunch of sex-positive naked people. And it doesn't cost that much money to facilitate what is the more masculine side of a relationship, the physical sex. It takes a lot more skill, competency, discipline, and inner work to teach love languages competently, to become trauma literate, to understand the sensitivity continuum, to understand the foundation of trust in an empathic relationship, to honor agreements, to have the discipline to put one's partner ahead of one's addiction, be that addiction to porn, food, work, money, power, sex, distraction. All people with underlying traumas are addicts to something, because as they expand into some part of their emotional self in a framework that is brutally sociopathic, they feel pain. And in a cult that shames that pain and shames it as negativity, as one expression in New Age circles, is that's you're being negative. Look to the positive. Be grateful for your car. Be grateful for your nice house, etc., etc. Usually it's outer things. But in speaking with more than 50 married couples in informal surveys, I don't recall one of them being able to answer the question, what would make you feel totally and completely loved? And does your partner know it? And what would make your partner feel completely and totally loved? And do you know that, and do they? And watching married couples who have been together for 10 years seem befuddled, confused. It's like, wow, that's an interesting question. When that is the single most important question for a relationship based on empathy, to actually understand the feelings of the other and the origination of those feelings, which ties to past patterns. Past patterns, traumatic or otherwise, create a pattern of feeling. And to bring pleasure, to bring sustainable well-being and honor to those arenas requires insight. It requires the same technology, precision, as it would take to solder a computer chip. But it's just not there in the most vague sense. And so, at its core, what I'm bringing up around the sociopathic protocols towards the sexual abuse survivor at High is a question and challenge and insight into the cult system that produces community members who will not invest in their own psychological literacy as much as they'll invest in their makeup or apparel or car or whatever, and will not invest in the science of the inner world in the same way they would invest in the science of an iPad, to actually have data-based results, to actually be interested, to know what area their particular therapist or healer or psychology is good versus bad, to actually want to know that data, to volunteer that data for the healer, for the psychologist, for the school, to actually want to have that data, to know exactly how everyone's feeling within that protocol and that system, and why they're feeling that way, and what parts of the system in the therapeutic relationship are sick, are adding to unnecessary pain, are based on profound systemic ignorance of both the patient and the therapist. To actually know enough to know what you don't know takes a certain amount of investment counter to the cult. And the community ultimately has the power. The customer, in the broadest sense statistically, always gets what they want. But if the customer values money within a capitalist framework and doesn't have the competency to discern between a licensed and an unlicensed therapist, a therapist that gets a 98% response rate for working with depression versus another therapist that gets a 25% response rate when dealing with depression. To know the difference between a therapist that may be very good, statistically speaking, with women, but terrible with men, or vice versa. Before you can see 10x improvement in those areas, the way we've seen a 10x improvement from the first smartphone to the present smartphone, requires a shift in value. And that's on the individual, because it's not coming to us from our ancestors, it's not coming from the cult. The problem with chauvinism as a cult system is it inoculates all interactions. What's it have to do with me? That's not my problem. That's not my business. 3 of the most common statements in our cult, all dissociating from a deeper truth, which is that to the empathic brain, it's all our business. It's all our problem. It has everything to do with us. If we want to have the capacity, not even the experience of, just the capacity to love and be loved, to trust and be trustworthy, not just to paying our bills, but to paying our emotional debts. If someone extends resources to you psychologically and emotionally, and you say, yeah, but I'm not going to pay for that. I'm not going to thank it. I'm not going to pay for it. In fact, I'm going to just look on the offhand and kind of critique that. I'm going to find some way to discount it, which is easy to do in a chauvinistic cult because you're speaking from half of the psyche that has been deranked unscientifically and dogmatically. If you just say anything feminine is not valuable, that's a dogma, it's not a science. Then anyone who takes a feminine position based on intense feelings can be deranked and thus not listened to, just applying the dogma, not the data. The data, when any circle is cut in half, the scientist tells you that each half has equal weight innately and has equal value innately, and that its value comes from its difference. That's where you get a battery engineered with an equal positive and negative charge. If you had 100% positive charge because you're a chauvinist, you don't get electricity. You get nothing. So out of this general framework, we have a community that dissociates from sexual abuse survivors. But we also have a community that doesn't challenge its leaders to develop the feminine side of the psyche. And we also don't have a community that will pay someone for deep psychological medicine and healing more than they would pay an attorney, or at least as much. So the chauvinism is built in. To say, I want the same level of competence and excellence and reliability to have an effective cure for trauma, and I want it to see it instantly, and I want it on measurable metrics, and I want to see it in my body, and I want to see this, and I want that next Tuesday. But I don't know, $100 an hour sounds a bit expensive to me. I'd like to, this other person is going to solve all my karma instantly for $50, or it's by donation. I love it. I love it. That's not a really important area, but if something good comes out of it, fine. But I would never fund and write my officials why I want psychological studies to prevent childhood abuse. I want to study which country around the world is doing the best per capita. I want to know which countries do what forms of trauma and abuse to their children in a group of 1,000 children. Is it, are we in the United States, are we country number 37 in terms of the childhood abuse rankings? Are we country number 60? Where do we rank? And then I want to see progress reports that show fewer traumatized children in this metric, and this metric next year. And I want to allocate a budget that is appropriate to secure those results. And I want my therapist to be competent, licensed, trained, psychologically literate, and to actually know what empathy is, and understand their value hierarchies, and know and do their role better than a computer technician at a good computer shop, and gather and share more data, be more accountable. That's what I want. But a chauvinist will not fund it because it's not clear to the reptilian brain how having your partner smile with more relaxation and innocence is worth $2,000 that could have been spent upgrading a granite countertop where you could both scowl and have nothing to say, but within the materialistic framework, both agree that you're making good progress. The marriage must be a good success. Look at the old dump we used to live in before. Now we've got granite countertops. We've arrived. We'll get you the expensive car next year. And, let's just watch TV to cover the silence. The horror of that chauvinism is all around us, but it is a horror that only an empath who understands what was lost, who understands the price, can possibly understand. Because the reptilian brain cannot feel grief, pain, loneliness, or loss. The reptilian brain can only measure its rank within a power system and feel fear of survival and security and rank, and learn better manipulation skills to climb the rank, whether it's relational rank, rank in sex. You have the whole sociopathic mating game that's mistaken for love. As someone tries to manipulate, as one woman tries to manipulate in such a way that destroys the rank of her rivals so that her alpha male will pick her to protect as a rank issue, with or without a genuine sense of love. And the cruelty, the lies, the deceit, the omissions that you find in relationships all across the cult, whether it's begging people who don't care about you not to de-rank you by disassociating their rank from you and caring little about the scared little girl or little boy inside is met with contempt and is sacrificed to climb the rank system established by who's the cool person, even the word cool. In an empathic framework, it would be who's the warm person. Within a sociopathic framework, cool is closer to the reptilian brain than warm. So you want technical competency. And you even have people drawn to cruelty as an attractor. The fact that you showed contempt for me, the fact that you rejected me, the fact that you think I'm completely worthless is a turn-on. Because what it tells me is that you are a competent reptile. And if I can just associate with you and pair with your competency in a reptilian framework, then I will have better survival security position and statistical odds within the cult that has a reptilian framework. And then, of course, it is cool to look human and warm and stuff. So through that lens of pattern analysis, you can, particularly in times of scandal or whatever, donate something to a worthy cause. But there's no empathy whatsoever. It's completely reptilian in its political machinations and calculations. Within this framework, a board of directors, such as the Human Awareness Institute board of directors, are of course not valuing the job very much because it doesn't pay anything. If it was a valuable job, they would be paid. If it was a valuable job, they would be chosen by their competency. Have you any experience professionally in systematically eradicating sexual abuse? Well, all schools that teach sexuality in a larger sociopathic framework are going to have sexual abuse. So we want to pick the very best people who care about those protocols. But if the audience, if the cult clientele will not pay the board of directors anything, don't really care at all, how was the sex? What happened there? Are there any hot young ones? Then who cares? Whether you have sexual predators in the midst, that could be hot, right? A sexual predator, sex with a therapist, is he good looking? You don't actually care about the competency of the leadership body. And so the organizations that will be rewarded and perpetuated will be those that do not have to pay for the competency that matters to really take care of the feminine side, to gather the data. You may not even want to know how little you know if you're a chauvinist, because words are really cheap. And one form of chauvinism is replacing substance with words because words are so cheap. And if your entire arena is cheap, if becoming emotionally and psychologically and traumatically and relationally literate is automatically downgraded just because it's feminine, then you want to buy it at a discount. And what's the cheapest discount you can possibly have? Well, you just take all of the corruption and cruelty and ignorance and circular abuse dynamics that have been going on forever, and you pay someone a little amount of money to call that love, to call sex love. We'll just call that love, and you're done. Great, well, that wasn't too bad. You didn't have to spend too much money. Your friends in a reptilian framework won't give you too much time. If you stopped a good paying job to study your feelings for 6 years, people would think you were nuts. Within the reptilian chauvinistic framework, you would be, because that doesn't get you rank in a self-referential loop. Now, the lawyers who prosecute sexual abuse are at least as sociopathic as the rest of the cult. They evaluate your case not based on pain, but on the target's assets. So, for example, if Bill Gates had sexually abused me, the best attorneys in the country would be sending their cards to me and making it happen in every possible way because there's big money in it. But if someone is going up against a judge or a priest and the legal fees are going to be high, and it's not clear you've got enough evidence to prove your case, it's not about justice. It's about a sociopathic analysis of the case. And the attorney doesn't want that coming out, and so they don't want to participate in any exposure of their reptilian behavior in response to sexual abuse, because their job as attorneys within a reptilian framework is to make as much money as possible and to win. And they're quite happy to sign a non-disclosure agreement promising to keep all the incidents secret for an extra $100,000. Because what do the next victims matter? They don't. Because if the attorney is getting a 40% split, then the extra $100,000 to sign the non-disclosure is $40,000. And it took them just a few minutes to convince their client that this was what they needed to do. The attorney might even get angry at their client for advocating, no, we need to publicize this. And the attorney said, well, but your settlement will go down. Yeah, but the next victim will know what's going on. The next victim will be protected. How many attorneys view that opportunity with honor as a chance to be a human being, a chance to reclaim empathy? Because how can you afford to empathize with a future victim that you've institutionally created by agreeing to secrecy? How can you empathize with the next victim? You can't. Because you picked $60,000 and your attorney picked $40,000 to destroy years of their life and 25% of their dignity. You didn't just do it for them. There's a wave of complicity as one person after another in high profile, meaning where money is involved, cases sign, here's an extra $1 million. Nothing gets out. And then you discover exactly why Disney colludes with Harvey Weinstein to intimidate one young woman after another so that Harvey can make Disney money and buy Oscars that, again, make Disney money. It doesn't matter that Disney is about being part of family. If family gets in the way of one of their top money-making individuals who just happens to be a repeat chauvinistic sex offender, who didn't come out of nowhere, by the way, who learned through the complicity of the entire system that that's fine, as one person after another didn't want to take an individual hit to challenge a corrupt practice. Now, if we punish facilitators or therapists for coming forward and acknowledging that they don't know what they're doing, we have a couple of ways to punish them. We can scapegoat them and pretend that the system is perfectly sound. And it is really easy to learn about relationships and love and sustainable relationship. Just pay my fee. It's really easy to do, but somehow even the therapist couldn't do it. And we just scapegoat the therapist and pretend the next one is going to be like the proverbial next president. This time, Obama, Clinton, Bush, Trump, this time, Biden. Change will come. But we're not going to deal with the chauvinism of money. We're not going to deal with the wanton level of willful ignorance of large amounts of the population. We're not going to look into the corruption on Biden's side, whether it's his sexual molestation of Tara Reade, or we're just going to be it's change. It's just fill a new chauvinist in the role. And some are worse than others. But the U.S. is on a downward spiral. Its currency is losing value. You print trillions of dollars in bills, most of which has not gone to the people who need it most, because that would be empathic. We already know the people who need it most are homeless, and most of them do not get a penny, despite being hot spots for spreading coronavirus. So if we really want to take care of coronavirus more than in any other way, we would give every homeless person a free hotel room, have a health professional keep their body in good health, make sure they don't have to mingle with other homeless people to socialize and they have some dignity. Give them good food and vitamin D3. Helping the homeless, statistically and scientifically speaking, could do more for controlling a virus than many other things. But they're the ones getting the least help. And weak and vulnerable bodies are the bodies in which viruses mutate. So it's not scientific, it's sociopathic. It's counterintuitive to help the homeless first, and then help the president and this and that, get the vaccine. And let's make sure that Bank of America and colleges get tens of millions of dollars, but not are homeless. It's unscientific, but it is sociopathic, and it is lacking, in intelligence. Now, if therapists come forward and say, yeah, I don't know what I'm doing here, and I don't know what I'm doing there, and I'm seeing the same cases, and I'm not even asking my clients how well they've improved in the last 6 months, because I don't want to know. And I'm not asking them how I could improve, because I don't want to know that either. I'm not studying new courses, because I'm not going to get any more money for studying new courses. And yes, I do sexually abuse, as 12% of therapists voluntarily admit in an anonymous survey of thousands of them, so they can't be traced, right? But the 12% that admit to sexually abusing their clients, they don't resign, or because they're rewarded for remaining anonymous by a population that is just fine. There's no central reporting database so that 5 different people could report sexual abuse of a therapeutic professional, licensed or otherwise, and where anyone could go and look at that data, and that would actually have a bearing on whether or not you would pick them as a therapist, as opposed to how nice their smile is and how much they ease your anxiety during the session, which would get ranked very high as an expedient immediate return, whether or not it pointed out anything fundamental or useful to your condition, such as here's how your trauma occurred, here's why it's occurring, these are the things you need to know about it. This is statistically normal, and these are the roadmaps you need to navigate in the terrain that you're in. I've never got that once from a single therapist with $150,000. That's not expected. The population does not ask for that. Now, if the population responds with a sexual abuse scandal coming up that's relatively common, I mean, if 12% of therapists sexually abuse their clients, and those are the ones that admit it, that's rolling a dice. You go and see 10 therapists, one's going to sexually abuse you. And of course, sexually abusive individuals, much like criminals, will be able to tell who their victims should be by those who are receptive. And who's receptive? The ones that will not understand the extent of the abuse, that have already been abused before. So your father incestuously raped you since the age of 15. You still kind of think your father loves you. The therapist looks at you and thinks you're hot. You're still young and attractive. Hey, if you'd let your father rape you and you think he was kind of well-meaning, come have a seat over here. And if the therapists rank, part of the rank, most sexual abuse happens by men. If their rank actually goes up because of a power dynamic, a status associated with having more sex or getting away with something, plus pleasure, and someone's willing to pay them to sexually abuse them, and they get to take their pick and assess who's the risk and learn all their ins and outs and have that available, well, they feel more alive, more excited, more popular, less lonely. They don't have to watch as much porn. But what if they come forward and talk about, this doesn't seem right? You see, if they're just drummed out of town and the exact same protocols that made it beneficial for their well-being to go up, if they're just drummed out of town and no database, no increased change in licensing, we don't want to learn about that. That's feminine stuff. Leave that to the professionals, and they can judge and assess themselves. And it doesn't change the statistics. The next therapist just learns, when they sexually abuse their clients, not to talk about it at all costs, even if that means effectively asking their victim to commit suicide. Tara Reid's life and body and career deteriorated and has deteriorated. And for coming forward, she receives death threats because other people who don't care a bit about her do care about the fact that if Biden is a known sex offender, he may not be able to defeat Trump. And so we play this very bizarre musical chairs game where we have our little dogma, our vision of things, that we have an identity we hold on to. And certain people fit our identity, so we vote for them because they're going to keep our version of reality ticking and moving along. Well, ultimately it is the circle. Are people, with 20% of Americans depressed, with 77% chronically lonely, with quality of friendships deteriorating, are human beings willing to buck their cult and question the system and face the unknown in a way that would lead to the science and funding and rank of feminine topics, where you could see this is based on the data of how many minutes and how many dollars and the experiential data of how did it feel, how long did it last, that these people rank best in the country for doing this and this and this. Now, within capitalism, you still have the best talent available for the highest dollar, not the person that needs it the most. We're still in a reptilian framework of I'd rather see someone with a mild trauma who's rich and who will pay $300 an hour than I'd like to see a terrified child who has who's from an orphanage and has no money, who is talking about the sexual abuse by the people at the orphanage, who will stop sending therapeutic patients who have money to me if I cause trouble for the orphanage. Well, capitalism is very clear. You ignore the orphans and you attend to the mild inconveniences of your wealthiest people as if that's the highest priority. You're just in a reptilian cult in which money is more important than human beings. It's not entirely clear how to get out of a reptilian cult when as soon as you move out of alignment with the cult rules of the reptilian brain, you are immediately cast into a lower rank area where your pain matters less and you are deemed less valuable. And so your pain goes up in a reptilian cult for doing the right thing. Meaning, if you do the mathematically correct thing for the species in a reptilian cult, you will be punished for obeying the law of empathy. Your pain as an empath will go up, hopefully from a status quo perspective, to a point where the pain is too high to sustain an empathic position. And you will get more in line and start climbing the sociopathic ladder again. This is a very real structure, meaning people are bowing and praying and serving with fear-based obedience the dictates of the reptilian brain with far more loyalty than they are the data, the science of psychology, or what's good for their wives and husbands or children. Now, that doesn't sound very good, and so it's really cheap to just relabel that and say, my family comes first. I'm just not going to follow any of the data that shows me what I have to do to actually make that true. I'll just do what's rewarded in the cult. I'll follow the protocol. And part of what sustains the status quo is renaming highly sociopathic behavior in all areas of the cult. You know, whether it's a nurse or a nun. You know, a nun in offering up deaf boys to a known pedophile because he's higher in rank in the Vatican. It's got to be a mind fuck. You give up all this stuff to be a nun and chant and do all this so that you can go to heaven. And what gets you the most reward within the church is offering the most vulnerable demographic of traumatized children to pedophilic priests and then looking for his blessing. You know, it's the same kind of schizophrenia that we see in a Christian fundamentalist that will vote for an individual who, whether it's lying, killing, stealing, adultery, greed, coveting the neighbor's wife, whatever the commandment is, they've done it. But they maintain the appearance, which to a chauvinist is all that matters. It's the appearance over the substance. The Human Awareness Institute must not fail. We have an important statement. But the substance, actually doing our mission, helping the people we sexually abuse, owning the chance to learn, it's just not, it's not there. The reputation, the important statement, the words, not the substance. And so there are no scapegoats in a system that rewards you for being a good performer. There will be good performers who are sociopathic, good performers. You have a Peter Sandhill who will talk about love and goodwill and being great at trauma therapy and will not offer a refund for sexually abusing his client. It's not what a reptile would do. Instead, Peter complains to his men's group and has anonymous men call up on blocked phone numbers to protest the outrage. This is what they did to the Catholic boys who protested the pedophiles in their community. The priest put pressure on the parents. If you want to be good Catholics, we can't have your children spreading lies about the church. Or if the evidence became too extreme, they would silence and pay off, hundreds of thousands of dollars and just form a fund at the Vatican to rotate the pedophiles and keep paying off the victims for silence, not for decency, not for following the mission, because we can't damage the reputation. The symbol of value, the false god, becomes more valuable than the underlying value, the essence, the substance. But if you're psychologically illiterate because of the chauvinism of your cult, can you even tell the difference between that? Can you know the difference between honoring your mission by shutting your organization if necessary to give it substance? Because if your mission dictates that you stop doing your job to fulfill your mission, and you actually value the reality of that, then you give up your title to pursue your mission. But if the position or the rank or the words or the organization or legal structure is more valuable than the science that allows you to get your mission done, the classic equation of the environmental summit that has people fly in from all around the world, serves fast food in paper cups and plastic bags, and sells hundreds of thousands of t-shirts, where 3/4 of that money raised goes back into advertising, which is sending out more paper to save the planet. But boy, does it look good. Wasn't that a good conference? With over 1 million people who spend fossil fuels to come to our protest, our this, our that, and we smashed things, and we're not going to take it. If all of that money and time, etc., had been donated to plant trees, rather than plaster, spray paint on walls, etc., would 100 million trees do more for the environment than $25 million and $75 million spent? These analyses, it's about appearance. It looks good. At the biggest march, the biggest campaign, I just send out envelopes endlessly and get every last penny and put it right back into marketing. And then we don't ask for data. Well, we actually do a better job there than we do, because it's a physical thing, than we do with therapy. But what chauvinism is ultimately about is creating a world where everyone loses. The men lose, the women lose, the feminine in both masculine and feminine, and the feminine in both male and female is in pain, which increases addiction, etc. And so everyone loses when we lose our humanity by cauterizing the empathic brain. This protocol, the one I'm talking about here with High, the one I'm talking about with our homeless, is a sociopathic protocol that guarantees that everyone loses. And the responsibility, the only people able to respond, is us as individuals, to become emotionally and psychologically literate, to analyze our chauvinism and the harm it's causing and do something about it. As we change, our taste in leadership changes. As our taste in leadership changes, the leaders change. If they're gained rank and value for keeping data records and doing well on those, imagine a Forbes 400 list of the most competent therapists in the country for healing trauma, and where all the therapists in the whole country were competing as feverishly as Trump competes to inflate his assets to where he could rank higher on the Forbes 400 richest people in the world. Scapegoating a person, silencing a victim, sugarcoating the abuse, renaming the abuse, bowing to the system, the statistics will stay the same. So the real question is, how do you change the system from the inside out? And as I learn about that, this video, books, more books, data gathering apps are my response. Because every transformation, every change, it requires a new technology and paradigm. It requires a new technology and awareness. It requires a new technology to disseminate information through apps, etc. And so that's where I'm putting my time. The purpose of this video is to heal the schizophrenia of being able, on the one hand, to say, I really don't want sexual abuse to occur, and I'm really sorry it did. But I'm not willing to participate in the science, in the transparency necessary to actually achieve that result. When we understand that that is the problem and there is no other people going to do it, then we can begin to take steps which ultimately ties into the future and sustainability of our civilization as a species and as a planet. Because the very same ethics that value money more than the people who make the money, values money more than the planet that makes the money, values money more than the feelings of the people motivated to make the money. You cannot destroy your host body, your mother, your father, your family, your ecology. You cannot destroy them or the next generation with a balanced appreciation for the feminine and the masculine reflected on a balanced investment of time, money, science, data, and technology. And that's the basis of every single request that I'm making. And within a chauvinistic, sociopathic paradigm, a leader and an organization will change only as much as absolutely necessary within the legal system, which they can't, unfortunately, unless they're very rich, buy off. But within an empathic system, are we as a people worthy of the professionals that need to be nurtured into being by being willing to request them, value them, pay them well, and advocate for the feminine terrain in sciences to get as much as the masculine reign of sciences, given that we have no food problem, no energy problem. We have a relational and an ecological and an emotional problem. There's plenty of food to feed everyone. And there's plenty of more people sitting around bored at home watching TV who could be producing food to feed everyone. Food and numbers of bodies are not the problem. The problem is the paradigm is unscientifically and dogmatically skewed towards a set of lies, towards the reptilian brain. And trauma is the linchpin. If we have one generation that mitigates the trauma that induces the reptilian brain and heals much of the trauma in the older generation, then the empathic brain comes back online. And the empathic brain is one of understanding. It is capable of being an adult. It's capable of love. And that's the only brain, and it is a higher level of consciousness than the one we have, capable of solving the species evolutionary crises and problems caused by a sociopathic, chauvinistic, reptilian brain in men and in women. It's not gender that is the issue, it's the protocol of raising boys and the protocol of raising women to often hate and have contempt for their most vulnerable feminine sides in their own psyche. Because in a chauvinistic cult, the more feminine you are, the more you are attacked and devalued. And the more your pain in those areas is buried and invisible. Each of us at each point of the circle can come into symmetry by understanding the starting point of misalignment and lies and asymmetry, which leads to pain, failure, and dis-ease.